Aladdin for Sega Genesis came out in 1993, 1 year after the movie released. It also ended up as one of the best-selling Genesis games of all time, with 4 million copies sold. What made Aladdin stand out was its art style. Aladdin stood out for almost looking like an actual cartoon. It looked very fluid for its time. Aladdin for Sega Genesis brought gaming visuals and animation closer together through the Digicel process, developed at Virgin Interactive by David Perry, among other names. Perry later on founded Shiny Entertainment and developed Earthworm Jim, which not surprisingly had the same gorgeous look and fluid feel that Aladdin for Sega Genesis had. According to Sega Fandom, the process successfully compressed the data from the animator's drawing into the limited processing capacity of the Sega Mega Drive. Thus, Aladdin looked like an actual cartoon and moved fluidly since it came from the actual animator's drawings. Okay, let's look at some of the levels and overall gameplay. After all, no matter how much I love the graphics in Aladdin for Sega Genesis, the gameplay and sound need to remain competent. The game starts you off in Agrabah Market and immediately hits you with Prince Ali, which sounds great in Sega Genesis digitized form. I question whether they should have started off with One Jump Ahead, since that song is more closer to the beginning than Prince Ali. But it's fine. The main point is, once you hear Prince Ali and see those beautiful, fluid graphics, you're immediately thrown into the flow of the game. It actually feels like you're in the movie. As for what Aladdin can do, as you've been seeing on screen, he can throw apples, he can jump, he can swing his sword, which is obviously the main attack. As a tip for using the sword, sometimes it helps to just randomly swing the sword even if an attack isn't immediately obvious. The sword is good at deflecting attacks from enemies, especially those guards who throw swords at you. The apples are good for long-range attacks. For example, if Aladdin is on a rope and the enemy is far away, it might help to take the enemy out with an apple first before jumping onto the next platform. Apples are also good for some of the boss fights, in particular the final boss. And like any platform game, Aladdin needs to jump. If you make a mistake and miss a platform, most of the time it is your fault and not faulty game mechanics. I will say there's one part in level 6, the escape, where Aladdin needs to run and jump onto another platform with a giant rolling rock chasing him from behind. It took some practice and I got better at this specific jump, but I think anyone who plays this game for the first time might have trouble getting over. Just remember, the ledge extends longer than you think. When Aladdin does die, it's not so bad. The game takes you back to the intro screen with the little animation with Genie, and then it comes back to the palace view and a whole new world. It almost makes you want to die over and over again, just to hear a whole new world once more. Actually, the best track in the game is Friend Like Me, which is found at level 8 inside the land. But again, isn't this part closer to the beginning of the movie? And Aladdin never actually goes inside the land. As a side note, the Sega Genesis in the background is a nice touch to the stage. I don't look at the SNES Aladdin and think, wow, the animation reminds me of the movie, because it doesn't. Rather, the graphics in the SNES version feel more akin to Mega Man X, and that is probably a given, since Capcom also developed Mega Man X. Another difference is the method of attacking enemies. Aladdin can still kill enemies by throwing apples, but instead of using his sword, he does sort of a handstand on them. Perhaps Aladdin had a previous life as a street rat cheerleader, and learned to do some amazing jumps. Personally, I prefer the sword, but it's not a game breaker. The SNES version of Aladdin is fun in its own right, but it's nothing revolutionary in terms of visuals or gameplay. It's just another Capcom game. In most head-to-head comparisons and graphics, the Sega Genesis normally doesn't win against the Super Nintendo because the latter console had a higher color palette and could produce better graphics because of that reason. But in this case, the Sega Genesis version beat the SNES version in the graphics department. And that is no small feat. It just feels like Virgin Interactive went all out to make sure Aladdin on Sega Genesis could be the best game possible, rather than a rushed game to meet consumer demand. It sold 4 million copies, and deservedly so, as they clearly put a lot of work into minor details. I'm not a Disney fanatic, but the Aladdin series has always been a quality one. I even watched the first VHS-only sequel back in the day, which was called The Return of Jafar. There was a third Aladdin movie, which was called Aladdin and the King of Thieves, but I never saw that one. It was about Aladdin's dad, I think. What could be better about this game? It could use more levels. There are only 10 levels in all, and one of them is Agrabah Market repeated, although the second one is on the rooftops. Also, the levels are hard, but kinda short, meaning little replay value once the game ends. Maybe I'm nitpicking. There are only so many locations in the movie, and they already stretched out some parts, like with Aladdin going inside Genie's lamp. There are also some minor cheap deaths here and there, but again, it just takes practice. You guys should be able to find a physical copy of this game somewhere out there, considering 4 million copies were sold. Buy it and prepare to get happily frustrated at some parts.